Once again, we return to finding Pinto, as Fernao Mendes Pinto provided a mass record that modern academia simply ignores, in order to seize on only one coordinate on what translators define as a text altered by the Jesuits before publishing. That is an exercise in gross negligence, unfortunately. In this video, we will test the place names on Lequios with the historic basis in mind that the Philippines must be considered here. Any theory that does not consider the Philippines is not a theory at all and should be rejected by academia before they even begin. That's how they're supposed to operate, and unfortunately, they have failed us all. We have yet to find anyone who seems to have done this thus far. Thus, they are not offering an academic position. Let's call it what it is. It's just propaganda. Regardless of whether they call it tradition, even tradition should pass muster. It should pass the test of academic rigor. And when it doesn't, in really a laughable way, because it's so ridiculously off, such as saying Ryukyu is even remotely possibly the Lequios of history, then you know something else is in play. So now in Finding Pinto Part 4, which is part of our Return of the Lequios series, really episode 8, we're going to discuss Pinto's language that is used here in the narrative. And this is indisputably Filipino. And it's indisputably not Ryukyu in any sense. There isn't a single match here for Ryukyu, yet that is supposedly the settled position. No, it's not settled, that's for certain. And we're going to settle it right now in this video. Even Suwanosejima, however you say that, in Ryukyu, the island, well, one blogger linked to Lequios, ignorantly, quoting illiterate scholars, of course, and translators on this topic, with zero testing. As usual, this is what always happens, and we see it time and time again, really daily. It was inhabited. It was uninhabited from the 15th to the 19th centuries due to eruptions, thus really disqualifying it from the narrative. Yet, far worse than that, this is not the island of fire, which is what it's supposed to be according to Pinto if we're reading his actual words. Even its name appears to identify it as a shoal or sandbar in the shallows of the bay. Gee, that is a ridiculous definition for supposedly, this area where Pinto landed and was held captive, put on trial, etc. It's not Fire Island. That's not what it means. And it is just simply not its name. Either Pinto got it wrong, or Ryukyu is not a theory, period. Another island was renamed in Portuguese, but let's not pretend the Ryukyuans spoke Portuguese prior to the arrival of the Portuguese. Naming that island in a language, well, they knew nothing of. Duh. Talk about illiteracy at its worst. I wish I couldn't say that. I wish we didn't have to say that. But in this arena, this is such a ridiculous piece of propaganda. It is time to crush this once and for all. By name, that island is, well, simply taboo to an ancient sailor who would need natural deep water ports for a trade capital, and did not trade with shoals and sandbars as a rule. So even the very name is just ridiculous. So let's go to the Philippines, something that academics just simply don't do. They just ignore that it's even there. That is the reality. It was never named the Isle of Fire in Ryukyu. There is no such island there prior to the Jesuits, prior to this claim. But Batanes, Apoy Island, is literally Fire Island by name, directly as Apoy is fire. Hello? Again, they're not checking the record, and ridiculing in ignorance, does not amount to research. It is the epitome of ignorance. And no, we don't need to quote that from anybody, because it just simply is. Pinto described a powerhouse, not a ghost town and place named Isle of Fire, not one named for shallows and sandbars with no people. Hello. Also, not one named in Portuguese by the Ryukyuans before the Portuguese ever landed there. Therefore, when you see Ilha de Fuego, hello, that's Portuguese, and that is not the name of that island. Not traditionally, not in ancient Ryukyuan. Duh. That's pretty easy, yet that is seized on by one scholar after the other. Why would they do that? Because they're stuck in a paradigm of colonial bias. And it is ultimately racism. Let's call it what it is. Talk about circular reasoning. Even Rebecca Katz, translator, admits Pinto's memory may have faltered over time, but that his good faith cannot be doubted. Wow. Can you imagine calling yourself a fancy scholar and saying such a thing? It is nonsense. Huh? Did she care to think? Well, she certainly didn't think to care about the historic record. That's for certain. Clearly, she did not even worry about the embarrassment that would accompany such false statements. We see this all the time in the Jesuit paradigm. They say things and you'll look back and you say, wow, how could anybody really absolutely make themselves look so ridiculous? Yet they do. Why? Because they're committing propaganda. That is their mission. Well, we do not agree with either, as they are born in ignorance, inserting false conclusions as interpretation, such as Ryukyu as Lequios, when it fails every test a child could conduct, right? You need a PhD to do that? Are you kidding? She did not footnote it. She replaced the word Lequios with Ryukyu in absolute fraud, blatant propaganda. And one repeating that ignorance, claiming that is a position, well, they're just not genuine, and certainly no expert on this. They've never done the research. And this is the problem with much of academia, because they accept these kinds of narratives, especially as what they call tradition. Yet, no one goes back to look at whether that ever should have been treated as tradition when it fails all of the test. It's amazing. And why didn't Pinto publish his manuscript himself? The answer's right there in the record. According to Rebecca Katz, he was afraid to publish. Afraid of the Jesuits, who had immense power. He feared for his family's reputation. After watching the number of ways and times they called Pinto a liar, even in the arts, his fears materialized. As a former Jesuit, Pinto knew how they operated, and let us not forget, they still do, even attacking this channel daily in illiterate ignorance, never founded on anything but defamation, which they've even expressed in writing is their actual purpose. How about that? Pinto's book subtly criticized Jesuit-infiltrated institutions of his homeland, and in its original form, well, it continued valid geography against Jesuit corruptions that actually match the record up until his time, which we have demonstrated in previous videos in this series. He was not a liar. The Jesuits were. Now this we can test and prove. Watch this. So the church waited. And when Pinto died, someone altered his words, says the translator. Actually, multiple translators. Let's review language from Pinto's account, though. This is amazing. The ultimate cultural fingerprint. Locations noted in a foreign language that does not fit Ryukyu, certainly is not Portuguese, but it does fit, the Ivatan language from Batanes, and Philippine words appropriate to the context and use even. Wow, this is a no-brainer. Of all the ways to commit fraud and try to get away with it, this is one of the worst attempts we have ever seen. This entire narrative fails. It falls flat on its face in such an embarrassing manner that no one should be repeating this trash. Lequios is the Philippines. It was never Ryukyu. Obvious Jesuit manipulation of history, and they are caught. Watch this. Pinto was captured near an island he called Ilha de Fuego, Island of Fire. There is no record of this name in Ryukyu until after the Portuguese contact, as they renamed an island there in Portuguese in blatant fraud. In fact, that Jesuit tactic you're going to see multiple times. You're going to see tres magos, in other words, the three magi, three kings. Oh, wait a minute, they came from the Philippines. They did not come from Ryukyu. You're going to see Japan. Well, that's a fraudulent name. It's not Japan. That comes from really Sipangu, and Sipangu is Luzon Island, Philippines. It's never Japan. Not by the resources, not in any valid test. Obviously, they're just repeating a nonsensical narrative that they've never tested and that is unacademic. But see, what they did is they renamed an entire country with this fraud. So this is what we're dealing with. This is very steep and very deep and very dark. Except Ryukyuans did not speak Portuguese before they arrived, and they did not name their island in Portuguese, did they? No. Now, let's move forward with some others that are gonna blow your mind. Remember, the name Pangu, as in Sipangu, is not the name that Marco Polo, his paradigm from the Grand Khan, did not use the name to refer to the islands of Japan. He wrote a letter, the Grand Khan did, to the king of what we call Japan, and it is the king of Raban or Nippon. That is not Pangu or Sipangu. It doesn't work. This has always been fraud, and it's a massive fraud indeed. But even the Japanese know this. Watch our videos on Sipangu, and they'll blow you away if you haven't seen those. But in Batanes, these linguistics become very evident, as these are Ivatan and Tagalog words in Pinto's account of the Isle of Lequios, on which he was shipwrecked. So he's expressing the local languages of the Philippines, and then supposed academics say, oh, that must be in Ryukyu, though it's not there. They didn't even test it. They don't even guess. They just buy the propaganda, they swallow it, and they repeat it. Nonsense. And let's address this otherwise. Well, so Ryukyuans now speak Tagalog and Ivatan too? Well, they would have to, because that's the origin of these words that Pinto uses as place names in the account that define where he was located. They all fail in Ryukyu. So why in the world hasn't academia even looked into the islands just south of that in the Philippines to try to find what is so very obvious. Again, Apoy Island. Fire Island, well, it exists, but it doesn't exist in Ryukyu. It exists in the North Philippines, in the Batanes, Babuyan area. Its local name is Babuyan today, Claro, which has an active volcano, even Mount Pangasan. Oh wait, of course, that must be a mere coincidence as well. Panga. Pangu. Nah, must just be a coincidence. Oops. That's kinda hard to miss. Yes, Pinto calls it the Island of Fire, near where he was imprisoned, and there you go. It was Batanes all along, not Ryukyu. So do other distinct local words that certainly do not lead to Ryukyuan either. But how about the local languages of Batanes, Philippines? Again, we haven't seen anyone look at this before. On the island where Pinto was imprisoned, there was a place referred to as Tayid-Akonol. What could that be? You won't find it in Ryukyu. This is very evident, actually, as Tayid is a place on Batan Island. Well, still, oops. It is at the base of Mount Matarin, a volcano, also fitting Pinto. The second portion well identifies this area in Batanes as well, Tayid-Akonol, which means wild sea place in the local Ivatan language. Wow. Oh yeah, and they later built a lighthouse in that area called Tayid Lighthouse even. Wow. Grabe. Pinto mentioned a town of Pungor, meeting place in Ivatan. Oh, how about that? Yeah, that's what it means. That's a word in the Ivatan language. Must just be a coincidence though, except no such word exists in Ryukyu. So why is it even considered? This is Batanes, Philippines, period. Nah, no one would ever call a town a meeting place. Oh, that's just ridiculous. Ha ha ha, right? Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of ridicule that we get, but it is just stupid. Let's call it what it is. Of course, they would, but you will find such illiterate opposition criticizing direct etymologies and failing to provide any direct etymologies that lead to Ryukyuan at the same time. Talk about hypocrisy at its worst. Another very telling reference from Pinto on the Isles of Lequios is a place called Sipautor. Now, this also, well, it's not Ryukyuan, but a logical blend of pre-colonial Ivatan and Tagalog words yet again. And this is so obvious. Many Filipinos will know this, but Sipa is an ancient pre-colonial child's game in the Philippines, but hey, guess where it originated? In Batanes. Wow. I know, it's just too hard. Just too hard to connect. And the second half, in Tagalog, Utor is a field that has been cleared by burning. This is so hard. You mean where children would play sipa? Huh. This and these others are impossible unless they are true. Are these so-called crazy to consider? Well, no. What's crazy is claiming Ryukyu is a theory without testing this for that area, because it fails, and then finding there are no matches there, yet still propagating. 85% of the resources are missing. Place names do not match but fit Batanes, and actual geography from Pinto's unaltered words fit the Philippines. The real question is, how does this view become tradition in the first place? Exactly, when it leads to North Luzon. Well, academics were accepting Jesuit nonsense untested, and now it is just treated as fact when it is less than rumor, even. It would fail the test of rumor, for that matter. It is an outright lie. Then, and this one's good, there is this very odd place named Gundexilau. Say what? Well, that's not Ryukyuan, but imagine this. No, it again is Ivatan directly. Gundes means house in Ivatan, and Ilau is light. Wow! House of light, or lighthouse. Now, we are not conflating the lighthouse, the more modern version of it, which would be built far later. No, we never said that, ever. This invokes an ancient lighthouse, or simply a house known for light, regardless of the legend, which has been wiped out of history. This is Ivatan, period. For those trying to ridicule, well, ask them. Where is this reference in Ryukyu? Oops, it's not there. No, the Spanish did not leave these connotations, mostly as they were also infiltrated by the Jesuit order, who preferred Japan over the Philippines, and racism, really, even though they may have had other purposes. That's what it leads to. Changing history and hiding the Philippines by the admission of the translators, even. We've covered that. Even in Summa Oriental of Tome Peri, translator Cortazao mentions a people in Lequios called the Guros. He then, very stupidly, mentions it could be the Mongolians or Koreans, neither of which have any connection to these islands. How ridiculous. Now, we did have someone in comments say that there was some Mongolian migration to the Philippines at some point. Okay, whatever. We don't really see that, but here's the point. That is not what the gurus are. These are natives to these islands of Lequios, and they perfectly fit the guru, the Iguru, especially. Doesn't have to be that one. We don't know for sure, but what we do know is no such exist in Ryukyu. So that's why they go to conflated geography, trying to go to Mongolia and Korea in the blindness of colonial bias. Guru is very likely a reference to the Iguru peoples found in North Luzon or Lequios. Wait till we show you the river near them was even named Lequios on multiple maps, and we're going to get there in this series. Regardless of their intent, this is just plain racism. The real question is, why did the Jesuits hate the Philippines so much? To alter its history, and worse, why do they still? As they do not restore this, number one, and they attack regardless. Next, Pinto defines an area south of Lequios as Bansha. In Portuguese, the CH is pronounced as SH. So yes, I pronounced that properly. So this is Bansha, which appears obvious to anyone who knows the Philippines and anyone aware that there is no such in Ryukyu yet again. Clearly, Pinto was expressing Bisaya in Bansha, the very next large territory just south of the Luzon territory, as he describes it, to the south even. This is obvious. So what have we learned? Pinto's story was not fiction. It was edited, decompartmentalized, repackaged, and misrepresented. The Lequios were never Ryukyuan, they were Philippine. The Philippines fits every valid detail except for one manipulated, added plot point which conflicts with all other data, geography, culture, trade, archaeology. This is easy. That point does not even match itself. It's time we stop calling Pinto a liar and misrepresenting his words and start calling him, well, right, and characterize the Jesuits properly, as this is obvious. Yes, there are even Jesuits, such as Pinto, who corrected their manipulation throughout. We will cover some in this series, you'll see. Finding Pinto, the real Lequios, was here. All sources with links in our blog. Subscribe for more lost history, suppressed stories, and inconvenient truths. Be sure to like, share, and tell us what you think. And you may not wish to rely on YouTube's ability to notify, as they seem to enjoy crushing content creators on many levels. For this channel, they simply do not notify many, as we have received thousands of messages saying so. Be sure to go to thegodculture.org and click the subscribe box at the bottom of the page, and we will notify you ourselves. Always remember, prove all things for yourself. In the beginning, a garden was planted, enclosed within the earth, in the east, the Orient, far east, says Enoch before the flood, and Noah, who lived there and mapped it in the Philippines. The Bible has always led there, and even Bible historians knew how to read the Hebrew, such as Josephus in 90 AD, Lactantius and African in 310. And in 550, Cosmos, the Greek monk and merchant traveler who went to the Indies, wrote in Alexandria, Egypt, Africa, Christian topography, and he mapped paradise as the Philippines. That map was even published in the Greek edition of the Bible at one time. A 6,000-year track record, forgotten today by illiterate scholars. They have no education on this topic. Let us explore this massive trove of ancient maps. Israel is not east, and a spring is a spring, not a river, and must be fed by a mega river as its source, and must connect to 3 other heads as well, all rivers, and actually salt water even. Can they read? Africa is not east, nor in Shem's far east, where the garden has always resided. Mesopotamia is the occult creation myth of the Nephilim. Nice, scholars. Modern rivers from rain did not even exist before the flood, and the Bible never uses the word Tigris ever in the original Hebrew. Why do modern scholars have no clue when the evidence is so vast? The Garden of Eden revealed, resolving the 6,000-year testimony marking the Far East. Now available in print only, no ebook, on Amazon and Shopee Philippines. Over 75 high-resolution color historic maps with accurate interpretation no one can truly dispute. Get your book now, and a new series begins.